They didn't argue. They didn't raise their voice. They didn't break a single rule. And still, the boarding door closed right in front of them. If you're over 70 and planning to fly in 2026, I need you to listen very carefully because right now, older travelers are being denied boarding at airports across the country. Not because they did anything wrong, but because the rules shifted quietly and no one made sure you knew where they ended up. This isn't a rumor. It's not a maybe someday situation. It's happening already. I've watched it with my own eyes. People who arrived early folded their suit jackets neatly into carry-ons, printed their boarding passes, double-checked their gate, did everything right, only to be told calmly and firmly that they would not be getting on the plane. They walk away from the counter confused, embarrassed, sometimes holding back tears, asking themselves, "What did I do?" Here's the part that shocks people the most. Your experience no longer protects you. 20, 30, even 40 years of flying doesn't shield you from these changes. In fact, it can work against you. The habits and assumptions that kept you out of trouble for decades are now the very things getting seniors stopped at security, turned away at check-in, and left behind at the gate. You might be thinking, I've been flying my whole life. I know how this works. I know airports. I know the routine. And I believe you. You probably do know how it used to work. What you need to understand now is this. The system you're familiar with is not the system you're walking into anymore. Between late 2025 and early 2026, several things changed. Identification rules tightened. Airlines lost flexibility. Security procedures shifted in ways that hit older passengers harder than most, especially those who have been traveling the longest. These changes didn't arrive with big signs at the airport entrance. They didn't come with TV ads reminding seniors to check their documents. They slipped in through quiet policy updates, internal software changes, and memos you never saw. And when you don't know a rule exists, you have no way to prepare for it or protect yourself from it. That's how older travelers end up stranded, watching the plane they were supposed to be on push back from the gate. My goal in this video is simple: to make absolutely sure that doesn't happen to you. Here's why this feels so unfair, and why, once people finally understand what went wrong, they replay the whole experience in their head over and over. For decades, flying rewarded familiarity. You learned the steps, you knew what really mattered and what didn't. You figured out how early you had to arrive, what you could carry, how security worked. Travel became part muscle memory, part common sense. The new environment does not reward familiarity. It doesn't care how many miles you've flown or how well you know the concourse. It cares whether every box is checked, every document is correct, and every policy is followed exactly. No more, no less. Gate agents and TSA officers now have far less room to use personal judgment than they did a few years ago. They're not allowed to say, "You'll be fine this time," or "I know you, you're okay." Their jobs, and in some cases their contracts, depend on following the rulebook with almost no exceptions. So when something doesn't meet the standard, an ID, a document, a medical detail, the no can feel deeply personal, even when it isn't. Seniors are getting caught in this more than other groups because many of these new rules collide directly with the everyday realities of aging. Older forms of identification, long-standing medical routines, invisible mobility issues, medications that have been part of life for years. None of those things are mistakes, but under updated procedures, they can be enough to stop you cold. That's why so many older travelers are blindsided. They didn't ignore the rules. They simply never knew the rules had changed. Let me ground this in a real example so you understand what's at stake. Not long ago, I watched a 73-year-old man arrive early for a flight he'd been looking forward to for months. He was flying to his daughter's wedding. His suit was folded carefully in his carry-on. His boarding pass was printed and tucked neatly into a folder. He'd confirmed his ride, checked the gate, done everything exactly the way he always had. He'd flown for business in his younger years. He'd flown for vacations. He'd never once had a problem. At security, the officer took his ID, looked at it closely, and shook their head. His driver's license no longer met the federal standard for air travel. He had never heard of this. It had never mattered before. The agent didn't want to ruin his day, but their hands were tied. The rules were the rules. No matter how calm he stayed, no matter how many old boarding passes he could show, that flight left without him. The plane took off, the wedding began, and he was still standing in an airport. He didn't miss it because he was careless. He didn't miss it because he was irresponsible. He missed it because the regulations moved, and nobody told him. I'm not telling you this to scare you. I'm telling you because what happened to him was preventable. Every single failure point in that story is something you can avoid with the right information and a bit of preparation. That's what we're going to do together. Now, I'm going to walk you through the key things you must know before you fly in 2026 if you're over 70. These are not casual travel tips. They are not optional extras. They are the difference between being waved through to your gate and being told quietly, "I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do." We'll talk about what changed, why it matters, where seniors are getting tripped up, and exactly how you can protect yourself before you ever leave home. You do not need to be afraid to fly. You do not need to feel overwhelmed by all of this. What you need is to understand how things work now, not how they worked 10 or 20 years ago. Once you have that, you can move through the airport with your confidence restored. Let's start with the single biggest reason seniors are being stopped, and in some cases turned away, before they ever reach the gate. Identification. For years, a standard driver's license was enough. You handed it over, the agent glanced at the name and photo, and you were on your way. It didn't matter when it was issued or what symbol was printed on it. If it looked official and wasn't expired, it worked. That era is over. As the newer standards phase in fully, the system no longer cares how long you've held that license or how many flights you've used it on. The only question now is, does your ID meet the exact federal requirement for air travel? This is where countless seniors are getting blindsided. Many older adults renewed their licenses years ago, before these standards existed or before their state fully adopted them. They haven't needed to think about it since. In their minds, their license is current, so they assume it's acceptable. They arrive early, stand in line, hand over the card, and are told it is not valid for flying. The shock is immediate. Panic follows. And in that moment, there is no simple last-minute fix. If your ID does not meet the federal Real ID standard, TSA officers are not allowed to let you through. It's not a suggestion, it's a hard stop. That's why this rule is quietly destroying trips. You might be thinking, I renewed recently enough, I'm probably fine. But unless you've actually checked, you don't know, and guessing is too risky. Here's what matters. To use your driver's license as your only ID for domestic flights, it must be Real ID compliant. How can you tell? There should be a special symbol on the front of the card, usually a star. In some states, it's a star inside a circle. In others, it's a star cut into the shape of the state. The design varies, and that's part of the confusion, but the bottom line is simple. If there is no star at all on the front, that license is not Real ID compliant, and TSA will not accept it as travel ID. I've watched people try everything to get around this. They show boarding passes from previous trips. They explain they used the same ID last year with no problem. They ask for a supervisor. In the end, nothing changes. The agents aren't judging your character. They are checking compliance. If the symbol isn't there, they cannot override the rule. If you check your license and realize there is no Real ID star, you are not out of options. But you are out of time if you wait until the day of travel to act. A valid U.S. passport or passport card still works, whether your license is Real ID compliant or not. Many older adults don't have a current passport or haven't used one in years. If that's you, you have two main options: renew or apply for a passport, or visit the DMV to upgrade your license to Real ID. Whichever you choose, do it early. DMV appointments are filling up as more people wake up to the requirement. Passport processing times can stretch, especially during busy seasons. This is not something to leave on a someday list. Take your wallet out today. Look for that star. If it's missing, make a plan. Don't wait for an airport agent to be the one to break the news. Now let's move to something a lot of people have only heard in pieces: medical documentation. There's a rumor going around that once you hit a certain age, you need a doctor's note just to get on a plane. That is not true. Airlines cannot deny you boarding just because you're over 70. Age by itself is not a medical condition. However, there are specific medical situations where documentation is now required, and those rules tightened quietly toward the end of 2025. If you need supplemental oxygen during the flight, if you rely on a wheelchair for more than short distances, or if you have a condition that could reasonably require medical attention in the air, most airlines now insist on some form of medical clearance filed before the day of travel. Not at check-in, not at the gate. Before. This is where people are getting caught. The requirements are buried deep on airline websites. The names of the forms change from airline to airline. One calls it a MEDIF, medical information form. Another calls it fitness to fly documentation. But they all amount to the same thing: a signed confirmation from your doctor that you are medically stable to fly. Here's how to handle this calmly and simply. If you know you use oxygen, need substantial mobility assistance, or live with a condition that could cause concern mid-flight, call your airline at least 72 hours before your trip. When you get through, you don't need to recite your entire medical history. Just say, "I need to submit medical clearance for my upcoming flight. Please email me the form you require." That one sentence triggers the process. They'll send you a form or a link. You take it to your doctor. They fill it out and sign it. You send it back as instructed. Once it's attached to your reservation, it appears on the agent's screen at check-in and at the gate. No guessing, no last-minute judgment calls, no sudden, "We can't let you board." If you're thinking, "I'm okay most of the time, I just use a cane," or "I have a heart condition but it's controlled," this is where I want you to be cautious in your own favor. It's far better to have documentation no one ever asks for than to be questioned with nothing on file. I've watched passengers turned away because a gate agent had a concern and there was no medical clearance attached to the booking. The agent wasn't trying to embarrass them. They were afraid of being held responsible if something happened mid-flight without proper documentation. A little preparation ahead of time removes that pressure, for you and for them. Next, let's talk about something that seems small but causes huge trouble at security: how you carry your prescription medications. For years, many people have traveled with weekly pill organizers, unlabeled plastic cases, or mixed pills tossed into a single container. They're convenient. They're familiar. For a long time, no one looked too closely. That's changing. TSA officers are under more pressure to verify that medications, especially controlled substances or unfamiliar pills, are legitimate and actually belong to the person carrying them. If your medications are loose in a plastic box with no labels, the officer has no way to confirm what they are. When they can't confirm, they are now far more likely to confiscate them, particularly if the pills resemble something that can be misused. I've seen older travelers pulled aside, their bag opened, their pill organizer dumped out on the table. The pills aren't in pharmacy bottles. There's no label, no name, no prescription slip. The officers aren't being cruel, they just don't have the proof they need. Sometimes critical daily medications are taken away. That's terrifying, especially when we're talking about heart medicine, blood pressure pills, blood sugar medication, or other life-sustaining drugs. Here's how to avoid that completely. Every prescription medication you carry through security should be in its original pharmacy-labeled container. The label should clearly show your name, the name of the medication, the dosage, and the prescribing doctor. If you don't want to bring a full 30 or 90-day supply, go to your pharmacy and say, "I'm traveling and I need a smaller labeled bottle with just enough for the trip." Most pharmacies will do this at no charge. They print a second label and place an appropriate number of pills in a small bottle. Keep all of this in your carry-on, not in checked luggage. Checked bags are lost or delayed every day. Your essential medications cannot vanish with them. For liquid medications, insulin, certain eye drops, liquid pain medicine, and similar, you are allowed to exceed the normal liquid limit, but you must declare them. Don't try to sneak them through and hope it's fine. At the start of screening, look at the officer and calmly say, "I have medically necessary liquids in my bag that exceed the standard limit." They may ask to see and test them. It adds a couple of minutes, then you're done. To make this smoother, especially with injectable medications like insulin pens, carry a printed copy of your prescription or a short note from your doctor. It's not strictly required, but in real life it reassures officers immediately and can save you 10-15 minutes. Security needs verification. When you make that easy, the tension disappears. Now let's move to the part of the process that makes many seniors most nervous: the security checkpoint itself. You've probably heard of TSA PreCheck, and yes, it's an excellent program. You keep your shoes on, you leave your laptop in your bag, the line is often shorter, and the pace is gentler. But here's something many older travelers don't realize. Even if you don't have PreCheck, there are already built-in accommodations for older passengers in the standard line. If you are 75 or older, TSA guidelines allow you to keep your shoes and light jacket on in regular screening. That policy has been in place for some time, but because it's not announced loudly, many seniors never benefit from it. Officers are supposed to recognize age, but in a busy checkpoint, things get rushed. If you're over 75, when you reach the front, you can simply say, "I'm 75," and keep your shoes and light outerwear on, unless an officer specifically tells you otherwise for a specific reason. If you're over 70 but under 75, programs like PreCheck are worth serious consideration. One enrollment fee covers 5 years, and many credit cards now reimburse that fee. For people who fly even once or twice a year, the reduction in standing, bending, and lifting is often worth it. Whether you're using age-based accommodations or PreCheck, the goal is the same: reduce physical strain and confusion at security so the process feels manageable, not overwhelming. Now let's move from security to boarding, because this is where I see many seniors struggling unnecessarily and sometimes getting hurt, simply because they don't know what they're allowed to request. Airlines are required by federal law to allow passengers who need extra time or assistance to board before general boarding. That includes many older adults, but the announcements often make this easy to miss. You might hear, "We'll now begin pre-boarding for those who need extra time or assistance." But they don't say the word seniors. A lot of people over 70 feel awkward stepping forward. They don't want to seem needy or as if they're taking advantage. Please hear this clearly. Pre-boarding is not cheating. It's not cutting the line. It exists for your safety and for the smooth operation of the flight. When you board early, you have time to walk down the jet bridge without being rushed. You can reach your seat, get help from the crew to stow your bag if you need it, and sit down before the aisle fills with people in a hurry, bins slamming, bags banging into shoulders. From the crew's perspective, older passengers who need extra time boarding first make everything easier and safer for you and for everyone else. You qualify for pre-boarding if it takes you longer to walk down the jet bridge, if you use a cane or walker, if lifting a bag overhead is difficult, if you feel unsteady in crowds, or if you simply need more time to get settled without pressure. The rule is about need, not age. But many people over 70 meet that standard, even if they hesitate to admit it. Here's a simple script to use at the gate. Walk up to the counter, smile, and say, "I'd like to request pre-boarding because I need a bit of extra time to get settled." That's it. You don't need to give details about your health. You don't need to apologize. The agent will mark your reservation and call you during pre-boarding. There is no fee. It doesn't change your seat. It's not an inconvenience. But it can prevent a fall, a pulled muscle, or an exhausting struggle. I've watched many older travelers wait for their assigned boarding group, then try to make their way down a crowded aisle with people pushing behind them, overhead bins filling, the pressure to move quickly building. I've seen bags slip, canes snag, people nearly lose their balance. When those same travelers pre-board, the entire experience changes. There is space, there is calm. Crew members are available and focused. The risk drops dramatically. If this sounds like you, please use this protection. You're not asking for special favor. You're using a system that exists for exactly this reason. Now let's talk about mobility devices and wheelchairs, because updated procedures here can also surprise people. If you use a cane, walker, scooter, or wheelchair, you may find TSA and airport staff handling these differently than they did years ago. Devices may be swabbed for explosive residue. They might be sent through a separate scanner. You might be guided to a slightly different area for screening. This doesn't mean you're being singled out. It means the equipment is being checked like any other item. The key is to communicate as soon as you reach security. You can say, I use a mobility device and will need some assistance with screening. If you can walk a few steps safely, officers may ask you to walk through a scanner while your device is checked separately. If you cannot stand or walk without risk, you do not have to. You are allowed to remain seated in your wheelchair or scooter and be screened while seated. If anyone pressures you to stand when it feels unsafe, calmly say, I need to remain seated for screening due to mobility limitations. If it still feels wrong or confusing, ask for a supervisor. Supervisors are trained to handle accessibility issues and can correct things quickly. If your walker or wheelchair folds and you're able, collapsing it before it reaches the scanner can speed things up. If you can't do that on your own, ask for help. That's part of their job. The biggest mistake I see older travelers make here is trying to tough it out in silence, standing when they shouldn't, rushing to keep up, agreeing to things that raise their risk of falling. You are not causing trouble by asking for the accommodation the rules already allow. Now, wheelchair assistance. Many people assume they can just decide at the last minute. If I need a wheelchair, I'll ask at the airport. That used to be more reliable than it is now. Airlines contract with outside companies to provide wheelchair services, and staffing is often based on the number of requests in the system ahead of time. If you arrive needing help but didn't request it when you booked, or at least 48 hours beforehand, you may face a long wait. I've seen older passengers miss boarding because the wheelchair they needed simply wasn't available fast enough. If you know long walks leave you exhausted, if standing in line is painful, if navigating a large terminal feels like too much, request wheelchair assistance when you book your ticket. If your ticket is already booked, call the airline now and add it. Ask for help from check-in to the gate, and if you need it, from the gate to baggage claim at your destination. There is no charge. This is your right under accessibility rules. You are not taking someone else's spot. You're requesting a service that exists so you can travel safely. Finally, I want to talk about something that almost never gets mentioned: invisible disabilities. Not every challenge shows up in the form of a cane or wheelchair. Many older adults live with chronic pain, arthritis, shortness of breath, balance problems, early cognitive changes, anxiety in crowds, or other conditions that make travel harder, even though they look fine from the outside. Those conditions are still real, and they still qualify you for help. Airlines and TSA officers cannot guess what you need, and they're not allowed to assume. That's why it can sometimes feel like no one cares. In reality, they simply don't know. You don't have to reveal deeply personal details to get support. You can say something as simple as, I have a disability that isn't visible, and I need a little extra time and assistance. Then be specific about what would help. Early boarding, help with bags, someone to walk with you through busy spaces, or a bit more time at security. These are reasonable adjustments. They don't change the rules. They don't disrupt the flight. They just make the existing process safer and more manageable for you. Asking for them is not being high maintenance. It's using the structure that already exists to protect you. We've covered a lot, but here's what I want you to walk away with: how to pack and present prescription medications so they aren't questioned or confiscated, which age-based accommodations you're entitled to at TSA, and when programs like PreCheck can make a real difference. That pre-boarding when you need extra time isn't a favor, it's a right. How wheelchair assistance really works and why requesting it in advance matters. That invisible disabilities are real, valid, and protected. And you can ask for help without sharing your entire medical history. How a single quiet sentence to a flight attendant or gate agent can make solo travel safer and more comfortable. None of this is about scaring you away from flying. It's about giving you the information the system doesn't always explain clearly. When you understand how things actually work now, you get your power back. Flying after 70 is absolutely still possible. It just requires preparation, clarity, and the confidence to speak up early and calmly. The most important mindset shift you can make is this: too many seniors feel ashamed to ask for help, worry they're holding others up, or think they should be able to manage the way they did at 50. But the airport you're walking into in 2026 is not the airport you used 20 years ago. Today, managing it yourself doesn't mean struggling in silence. It means planning ahead, using the systems that exist and speaking up before a small issue becomes a crisis. When you do that, travel can feel structured, predictable, even calm again. I've watched prepared seniors in their 70s and 80s glide through airports, documents in order, assistance arranged, boarding early, medications packed correctly, while others, just as capable in everyday life, stumble through unnecessary obstacles simply because no one ever sat them down and explained the new reality. Knowledge is the difference. And now you have it. Before we end, I'd like to hear from you. What worries you most about flying as an older traveler? Is it the long walks, the security lines, managing medications, being rushed, or something else entirely? Share it in the comments. I do read them, and your answers help me decide what to cover next so that what you hear is genuinely useful in your real life. If this helped you, please share it with someone you care about, a parent, grandparent, neighbor, or friend planning a trip. A few minutes of information can prevent missed weddings, missed holidays, and a lot of unnecessary stress. And if you'd like more calm, clear guidance like this, consider liking the video and subscribing. It helps this kind of information reach the people who quietly need it most. Thank you for spending this time with me.